My name is Eskil. I'm going to be talking about how we did things on the UI. Now, this is my first presentation really to such a big audience, so bear with me if I do stumble a little bit. But I'll try and stay coherent. We claim that BBM extends to the UI, and in our case it was so because it was a legacy application. It's built with ASP.NET Web Forms. Now, some of you might be still working with that, and you probably know how terrible it is. Even though it seemed like a good idea at the time, it probably was the only option at the time too for us. So, code behind is extremely complex in ASP.NET Web Forms. I mean, if you start data mining to server controls, you have postbacks going back and forth, you have view state. I mean, there's all sorts of mess that you have to deal with, and it really obscures what you're trying to do. And by dealing with all that, you got wasted development time. You're trying to figure out what you're trying to do in your code behind, what's the code actually doing, and then wasting time debugging the binding of server controls again. Another result is a suboptimal user experience. You got postbacks, which again, you got partial postbacks, full postbacks, which will again hit the server, hit the database, rebind everything, and then you got to maintain your state, put things back into where the user was, and hopefully present them with the same thing they were looking at before they clicked something on the page. And there's lag involved. And one of the really unpleasant bits is that you can't test the UI apart from using Selenium, scripting the UI and sort of having end user sort of use case tests, but you can't really apply unit testing to the UI, which is something, it sounds like a pipe dream. It sounded probably like a pipe dream 5 years ago to be able to test a UI in unit tests, but we have achieved that now. Some of you might remember that. I mean, this is all the stuff you had to deal with. Depending on what you're trying to achieve on the front end, you might have to deal with 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, you had to deal at least with 2 of them, but at least a lot of them to maintain the state of your page and behavior. And then, with view state, control state, and pages get really heavy. I mean, there's easily, you end up with 100K plus of data, going to the client every time you're trying to do something on a page. So our typical code behind before we started, refactoring our UI was that. It was just messy. It just wasn't worth. It's not even worth presenting because you probably all know what it looks like, anyways. If you're doing web forms, I have done it. But we managed to strip it down to just using the onload. Now, the reason why we're still on ASP.NET Web Forms is that we have a hierarchy of master pages and navigation and user experience that we just don't have the time and effort, to be able to refactor the entire application. So we had to find, a quick way of, doing things differently, but still using the same sort of framework and architecture that we have. Like, we couldn't just jump into MVC using something completely different. Without spending a lot of time learning about that and applying that on top of the existing application. So how did we do it? We applied a model view model architecture using Knockout.js. The Knockout.js is it is a model view model architecture, but it basically is a pure JavaScript library. If you haven't come across it, this allows you to do UI bindings bound to a JavaScript view model, and you get the behavior in the UI, and it's really, really, really awesome. So we entered another version. So we coined the term Knockoutify when we needed to rip out the ASP.NET Web Form part of a page and use Knockout. So we Knockoutify a page when we saw the chance and the business reason to do so. So a simplified example of using the new architecture is on the server side, page load basically uses a controller to query the domain for a view model, serializes that into a JSON representation, sticks that on a string object which is protected so it's accessible by the front end of the ASPX page. Script side, on the client side, basically gets the initial data, creates the JavaScript view model, which is a modular pattern, applies the binding to the knockout framework, and in the HTML you basically get bindings to your elements and you bind behavior to your button. So basically when you click save here, it's going to call save function on the JavaScript view model and you define your behavior from there. So this is a real code behind that we have from one of our pages. So we have load values, which gets called by page load. We call to the controller to get the view data for a particular shipment, serialize it into the initial data property, and on the page, user does whatever he needs to do, clicks a button, and save basically calls a static page method on the page, on the code behind, to execute some sort of domain operation, and that's it. There's no postbacks, there's no interaction back and forth with the page, anything like that. It's basically load everything up on the UI, do what you need to do, and send the end result back to the server. Now that means that you're going to have to pay a lot more attention to your JavaScript. I mean, you have to start treating JavaScript as a first-class citizen of your code base if you're not already doing so. JavaScript no longer is sort of the hacky stuff you do on the UI to create dynamic HTML pages. It is actually part of the domain in a sense. It is what's defining the UI behavior and domain operations, business operations. So for those of you in the back, it's not really important what's on that screen. It's just that it just represents a structured piece of code in JavaScript that defines behavior, defines actions on page, which in turn is testable. Now this is one of our JavaScript test classes, or test suites for that class you saw before. And again, it's all structured code. It is JavaScript unit test. It tests behavior, it tests state changes, it tests validation, tests anything, provided that you've written your JavaScript well, everything is testable. It's part of our automated tests, and basically, when you're writing front-end logic, you can write TDD. Basically, you can write your JavaScript view models, you can test your behaviors, and then the end testing becomes sort of a second thing you do. So to summarize, what we've done is create a clear separation of concerns between what happens on the server and the domain, and what happens on the UI. So the server basically is more concerned about getting the right view data up to the client. The client is more about rendering this data, adding the behaviors, and being able to produce something that makes sense back to the server. So we have no more view state. The pages are much more responsive because they don't have to do postbacks unless there's particular reasons to do so. We can do more complicated validation on the UI to make sure that the user's doing the right thing, not having to post everything back and then get the error message after 3 seconds of server crunching through databases. We can test the UI. The UI code again is a lot more readable. We don't have to deal with the messy bindings in the server controls and the code behind anymore. Now again, still by using Knockout, we still have a problem with the pages are very cruddy. Now CRUD's not a good thing when it comes to DDD. We found a lot of our pages were still pulling up the domain models, letting users sort of modify the properties and send it back down again. What we really want to achieve is to be able to define a UI that explains more to the user what you're trying to do, focus on a single business operation, so the UI is more tailored to what the user is trying to do, and you don't have multiple users using the same page for multiple different operations and trying to keep everybody happy with one page. So what we ended up doing in the long run was actually creating a lot more tailored pages for the different businesses operation in our company. This is the shipment summary page. So this is one of the old pages. This is still ASP.NET Web Forms to this date, because we haven't even dared to refactor this page because it does too much important stuff. But there's a lot of things that do happen on this page. and a lot of them don't necessarily mean anything in the context of the other elements on the page. Now, what I want to focus on here is the part with the vessel details. Changing or even setting, what vessel a container is going to be shipped on, what date, and however it's going to happen, requires a lot more additional information from the business to be able to make a reasonable judgment on what's the best choice of vessel. Because we're trying to make money, and it costs us money to use the shipping lines. We've quoted our clients, this is going to cost you how much to ship from, in this case, where are you going from? Italy to Sydney. Now, if the operator who is actually assigning the vessel does not have all the information at hand to make a right decision, we might be ending up losing money. So what's missing on this page is buy rates for the particular origin and destination, and what we've quoted the customer. So we've created a new page for this particular business process, where there would be what available quote options are there for that customer that matches that shipment, origin, destination, and the available buy rates that they have in the system. So whoever's using this page now can make an educated decision what was the best option to put the container on. That'll make sure that the customer is happy and we maintain our margins. And if you haven't noticed on the page, that's the only action on the page, really. That's the business process. We're allocating a shipment. Now, I was going to attempt to try and do a live demo of some of the things that we are doing. How am I doing for time? Yeah. Quickly. So, there's another process with... That's our time for question? Pardon?
The phone didn't work, the connection.
Yeah. Might just stick to questions then, really, if anyone's got any questions so far.
So
Yep.
by applying knockout and all this stuff, you basically got rid of web forms as an architecture. So behind the scenes it's web forms, but like no postbacks, no view state, nothing, just stripped web forms.
That's right. So basically, the question is, are we still using web forms even though we have knockout in place?
Yeah.
But we're using web forms to bootstrap knockout, basically. So web forms is basically just the mechanism of getting the serialized JSON representation onto the front end, where we then utilize knockout to actually deal with the UI behavior. So the only reason why we're still using web forms is because we have a hierarchy of master pages, and refactoring the entire application not using web forms was just not feasible.
It was too hard, even like changing master pages.
It's all navigation. It's all very ingrained into the business, and it means because there's a lot of different pages we have in the system, it would affect everything.
Okay.
So it was very a quick and dirty way to get that happening. We could have done it differently. We could have started looking at MSC and started, create a parallel implementation of a second version of the system. But I think this was an option that we found was working well for us in just, making something different happening.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to really ultimately it just came down to cost. We could have done it, but do we spend our time rewriting that part of the application or adding new features or something that delivers other value? I mean, I'd say technically when I'm programming that, you don't even know you're using web forms. I mean, in the back of your head, but the experience with development is it's not there.
Yeah.
Are you mostly using the web methods to feed data through to the JavaScript dynamically, or have you got some web services in there as well?
Well, yeah, so the question is if you're using web methods or if you've got web services. No, we're mostly using web methods, so statically defined web methods, and the code behind was sort of the quick way that we found doing it. So any sort of Ajax operations will be calling web methods in the code behind. But you're right, we could have created web services, web APIs and things to do that as well.
It's a bigger job.
Again, it's a bigger job. This was, it was really about, quick and dirty, get something that's functional and that just gets rid of, having to deal with the code behind. Yeah. Anyone else?